The embassy compound in Basra throbbed with tension. Inside the sweltering control tent, the air was thick with the stench of diesel fumes, sweat, and fear. Radios hissed with broken static. Commanders barked over one another, maps lay scattered, and every eye flicked toward the clock. 200 hostages were trapped just blocks away, bound and terrified inside a school now turned into a terrorist stronghold. Gunfire echoed faintly through the walls, a cruel reminder that time was running out and the enemy meant every threat they broadcasted over the airwaves. Amid the chaos, she stood off to the side, helmet dangling from one hand, flight suit streaked with oil stains. Captain Emily Hayes wasn't on anyone's list of solutions, just another transport pilot waiting for orders. Yet when silence finally fell for a heartbeat, her voice cut through the air with 6 words that froze the entire tent. "Let me fly them out." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Captain Emily Hayes was 33 years old, though the lines around her eyes made her look older when the light hit just right. She was slim, wiry, built for endurance rather than spectacle, hazel eyes that seemed to measure before they judged. A faint scar ran near her temple, a reminder of a training accident years ago when she'd struck her head during a hard landing. On her left wrist, half hidden under a glove most days, was a tattoo, a pair of wings inked above a small anchor. Few ever asked about it, and she never volunteered the story. She came from Portsmouth, Virginia, daughter of a dockyard welder and a schoolteacher. Her father came home each night smelling of metal and salt, his hands cracked and blackened from labor. Her mother balanced lesson plans with family dinners, determined to give her daughter the grounding she herself had never known. Emily grew up practical, not flashy, never the loudest in the room, but the one who finished what she started. That quiet persistence was both her strength and her curse. People underestimated her because she didn't demand their attention. She enlisted as a mechanic first, crawling through hangars and underwings, scraping her knuckles on bolts and metal panels. She was the one wiping oil from her face long after others had clocked out. For years she turned wrenches in silence, memorizing every sound a machine made, every vibration that meant something was wrong. Then, when the chance came to apply for flight school, she went after it, not because anyone encouraged her, but because she couldn't ignore the pull anymore. She wanted to feel the engines through her hands, not just repair them. Flight training was brutal, filled with candidates who strutted and talked big. Emily was quiet, and that silence made her a target. But when it came to the exams, to the grueling night flights, and the tight maneuvers that separated the pass from the washout, she never panicked. Calm under pressure became her trademark. Instructors noticed, even if her peers didn't. By the time she pinned on wings, her career path had been written in dull ink: transport. She ferried supplies, fuel, personnel, the kind of missions that never made the headlines but always kept the fight alive. Her logbook filled with long hours, dusty landings, and missions where no one cheered when she returned. A workhorse pilot. Reliable, invisible. The others gave her nicknames, some affectionate, some not. Raven Stuck, the kind of call sign you don't choose but earn. She earned it during a deployment in Helmand, when she flew night after night through hostile corridors, black as pitch, her aircraft blending into the void, a raven in the dark. Few outside her squadron knew why. Fewer cared. Among the broader officer corps, she was the cargo queen, the one who flew crates, fuel, and evac, not the one who stormed into firefights. Her personnel file reinforced the image: a logistics pilot, steady but unremarkable. No awards with ribbons long enough to catch the eye. No flashy combat stories to tell in bars. It was easy to doubt someone like that. Easy to dismiss her in a room full of men who had spent their careers chasing the big missions. She didn't boast, didn't push her record in anyone's face. She avoided spotlight, and the spotlight avoided her. But there were shadows in her past no one in Basra knew about. Years earlier, she'd been attached to a mission that ended in silence, an attempted hostage rescue in Kandahar that failed. Her closest friend, another pilot, never came back. Emily lived with the memory every day. the weight of knowing she hadn't been the one flying that night. She told herself if the chance ever came again, she wouldn't hesitate. Not once. That loss became her quiet vow. Not one more hostage if she could help it. Not one more friend left behind. So when the crisis broke in Basra, when 200 innocent lives hung in the balance and commanders fought over half-baked plans, she wasn't thinking about glory. She wasn't thinking about proving herself. She was thinking about the faces in that school gym and the face of the friend she'd already lost. Her calm wasn't a mask, it was armor. She had worn doubt all her life, and now it was just background noise. In the heat of that tent, as the walls shook with distant fire and the air stank of sweat and fear, she was the only one who didn't flinch. The only one who already knew what had to be done. The tent rattled as another burst of gunfire cracked somewhere beyond the walls. Radios screamed with chatter, overlapping voices, snippets of Arabic intercepted in bursts of static. Sweat ran down the sides of men's faces, dampening their collars. The whole room felt like a pressure cooker, filled with the scent of dust, diesel, and fear. At the folding table in the center, commanders hunched over maps and aerial photos, their voices rising with each passing minute. "It has to be a ground breach," Colonel Mason snapped, stabbing his finger against the paper. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his ear. "SEALs go in, breach the perimeter, secure the hostages. That's the only way this works." "That school's a fortress," another officer shot back. "They've got barricades at the doors, snipers on the roof, and God knows how many IEDs in the courtyard. We'd lose half the team before they even hit the gym." Arguments layered over arguments. Some pushed for negotiation, others for armored convoys. No one agreed, and meanwhile, the hostages' clock ticked down toward dawn. Emily stood a few steps back from the table, arms folded, helmet dangling against her thigh. She didn't interrupt. Not yet. She let her eyes travel over the maps, tracing lines no one else bothered to follow. Rooftops linked like stepping stones, narrow alleys twisting through the city like veins. She spotted a stretch of concrete near the river, half buried under rubble but still usable as a landing strip. To anyone else, it was invisible. To a pilot who'd flown dust landings in Helmand, it was a lifeline. She opened her mouth once, quietly. "We could get them out by air. Drop teams from above, land here for extraction." The response was instant. A snort. Then laughter. "She ferries crates, not heroes," one captain muttered, not even lowering his voice. The colonel barely looked at her. "Last thing we need is a woman crashing in downtown Basra." "Stick to supply runs, Raven." His tone carried the finality of an order, dismissive, cutting. Several younger pilots chuckled, shaking their heads. One leaned over to another. "Cargo Queen thinks she's a gunfighter now." The SEALs in the corner didn't laugh, but they didn't defend her either. They just exchanged looks, subtle shakes of their heads, as if to say, "Not her, not now." Emily felt the weight of every eye not taking her seriously. Her chest tightened, the words jabbing sharper than the heat in the room. For a moment, she almost let it pass. Almost stepped back into the shadows where everyone seemed to think she belonged. But the map still lay in front of her. That hidden strip of concrete still gleamed in her mind, obvious as daylight. She could see the approach in her head, low, between buildings, rotors threading the gap. Risky, yes. Impossible? No. She remembered another tent, years ago, in Kandahar. The night her closest friend, Captain Jordan Price, volunteered to fly a mission, everyone else refused. Hostages on the line then too. Emily hadn't spoken up. She'd let him go in her place. And when he didn't come back, she'd lived with the echo of his last words to her, "If no one else steps up, you do." Now those words clawed through her memory, louder than the colonel's dismissal, louder than the snickers. She traced the path again with her eyes. If they dropped SEALs by rooftop insertion here, cleared a corridor, she could land on that strip and load the hostages in minutes. It wasn't madness. It was math. Still, the room closed around her with noise and derision. "Stick to crates, Raven. Basra isn't a runway. She'll get them all killed." The words stung, but beneath the sting was steel. Emily straightened her back, pressing her palms flat against the table. You breach that building on foot, you'll lose half your men before you reach the first classroom. You wait for negotiations, they'll start executions at dawn. You don't have hours. You barely have minutes. The tent went quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that's more insult than respect. Colonel Mason didn't even look up. You're dismissed, Captain. We'll handle this. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Inside, a war-churned doubt whispering that maybe they were right, that maybe she was just a transport pilot with too much nerve. But louder than doubt was the vow she'd carried since Kandahar. If no one else steps up, you do. Her eyes lingered on the radio, the clock, the map. 200 lives hung on the decisions made in this tent. What would you do in her place? Don't skip. The next section changes everything. The hours dragged on inside the tent, though every tick of the clock seemed like a hammer blow. The commanders quarreled, radios spat garbled chatter, and the stifling heat pressed down on everyone like a weight. Outside, the horizon glowed faintly with fire where the city smoldered. It was a place on the edge, a city holding its breath, waiting to see who would bleed first. Emily sat at a folding chair in the corner, helmet resting against her knee, the picture of calm. She didn't pace. She didn't shout. She didn't clench her fists like the others. Her stillness itself was unsettling, too composed, too controlled, as though she were waiting for the moment the noise burned itself out. Those who noticed her saw only what they wanted, a quiet cargo pilot with nothing to add. But if anyone had looked closer, they would have seen the small things that didn't fit. In the locker back by the hangar, her flight bag leaned against the metal wall. Tucked inside was a patch so faded it was nearly colorless, a winged dagger stitched into cloth, an emblem no one wore openly unless they'd earned it. Few would recognize it now. Most who did would be too cautious to ask. Later, when the radio operator fought to unscramble intercepted transmissions, Emily leaned over, pressed the headset to her ear, and spoke 3 quiet words in Pashto. The operator blinked. He hadn't expected her to understand a single syllable. "Where'd you pick that up?" he muttered. She only shrugged, setting the headset back in his hands. He couldn't shake the unease. Cargo pilots didn't pick up languages like that on accident. When the colonel demanded another ground assault draft, Emily slipped a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was an old map, creased and worn soft at the edges. Pencil lines crossed it in looping arcs and precise angles, routes that didn't come from theory but from experience. Extraction corridors marked in a hand that had flown them once before. She tucked it away before anyone could notice, but the paper weighed heavy against her thigh. The truth was there in fragments, scattered like shards of glass, if anyone cared to pick them up. But they didn't. They were too busy drowning in their own noise. The hostages' fate pressed harder with every passing hour. The terrorists broadcast through a crackling channel just before midnight. Their voice was guttural, cold, amplified for effect. "Executions will begin at dawn, 1 every 10 minutes until our demands are met." The words settled like poison in the tent. A few officers swore under their breath. The SEALs straightened, jaws hardening. The radio operator couldn't even meet Emily's eyes. She didn't flinch. She sat with the same steady breathing, the same stillness. The words hit her like bullets, yes, but she didn't let it show. Inside, her mind was a storm, pieces of maps and calculations fitting together faster now. She imagined the school gym, the chain doors, the rooftops, the air currents swirling between buildings. She could see it. She could feel it. Everyone else paced. Some argued louder. A few let fear creep into their voices, talking about negotiations, about waiting, about risks. Emily alone didn't rise, didn't shout. Her stillness began to draw stares, not out of respect, but out of suspicion. Why wasn't she panicking like the rest? Why wasn't she sweating the way they were? It was the same reason she had survived everything up to now. She knew panic killed faster than bullets. Calm wasn't a performance. It was survival. The night stretched thin. Every time the clock ticked forward, the air in the tent grew heavier, suffocating. 200 people tied to chairs in a darkened gym somewhere across the city were waiting for dawn. And dawn was coming too fast. Would you have trusted her in that moment or doubted her like the rest? The night finally cracked open with violence. Just past 2 in the morning, the embassy compound shook under a sudden rattle of small arms fire. The first bursts came from the north wall, sharp staccato hammering against the night. Shouts followed. Boots thundered across the gravel as soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. Radios erupted in frantic calls. "Contact north perimeter. Multiple hostiles." Emily had been outside near the hangar, helmet in hand, when the rounds snapped through the air. She ducked behind a concrete barrier, pressing her shoulder to the wall. Tracer fire arced like molten streaks across the dark, and the acrid sting of gunpowder filled the air. A soldier sprinting past suddenly staggered, then crumpled. A shout went up. "Man down!" He hit the gravel hard, clutching at his leg, blood already pouring between his fingers. Chaos rippled instantly. Young privates hesitated, torn between returning fire and helping. A medic was still too far back. The man screamed, panicked, his breath ragged. Emily didn't hesitate. She tossed her helmet aside, sprinted across the open space, and dropped to her knees beside him. "Hold still," she said firmly, voice low but steady. Her hands were already working, tearing cloth, applying pressure with practiced precision. She moved like someone who had done this before, not just once, but many times. She clamped the bleeding with a tourniquet fashioned so quickly it left the nearby SEALs staring. Within seconds, the soldier's screams turned to gasps, then to shaky breaths. His color began to return. One SEAL crouched nearby, still firing bursts toward the wall, but his eyes flicked back in disbelief. "Since when does a cargo pilot work like a combat medic?" Emily didn't answer. She tightened the knot, checked the pulse below the tourniquet, and leaned close. "You're going to make it," she told the wounded man. Her tone left no room for doubt. The incoming fire tapered, then fell silent as quick reaction teams pushed the attackers back into the night. Radios called all clear, boots shuffled, soldiers exhaled in relief. The wounded man was hauled to the aid station. Emily retrieved her helmet quietly, brushing gravel from her flight suit. A few pairs of eyes followed her now. They weren't laughing. They weren't sneering. They were unsettled. Cargo pilots weren't supposed to know how to do that, but no one asked her. Not yet. Hours later, back in the command tent, a tactical briefing gathered the pilots and flight officers. The plan was fragile at best. Insert SEALs on rooftops, attempt to breach, evacuate the hostages. The discussion turned technical. Wind speeds, approach vectors, rooftop clearance, numbers rattled off with urgency. Lieutenant Harper, a young officer at the table, sketched a flight path with his pencil. Wind from the southeast, 15 knots. Adjust 5 degrees on approach, you'll clear. Emily, standing behind him, frowned. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the calculations. It's not 15 knots, it's 17, gusting to 21. That corridor will push you left, straight into crossfire. Harper turned, startled. What? She reached past him, flipped the page, and penciled the correction in 2 swift strokes. You'll need at least 7 degrees of correction, or you'll drift into their kill zone. I've logged the crosswinds in this sector for weeks. Trust me. The tent went quiet. Harper swallowed, rechecking the numbers. She was right. Completely right. A mistake like that in the middle of the city could have sent an entire bird spiraling into buildings. Emily stepped back, letting the silence stretch. If you want them alive, you fly it this way. The SEAL commander's eyes lingered on her a moment longer than anyone else's. He didn't say a word, but his expression shifted, just slightly from irritation to something heavier. Recognition, perhaps. Word of the ambush spread quickly through the compound, and with it, word of what Emily had done. Soldiers whispered about the way she had knelt in the gravel, calm as stone, saving a man's life before anyone else moved. The story grew louder each time it was told. Some dismissed it as luck, others as training, but whispers had a way of crawling through walls. By morning, when she walked through the mess line, the air changed. The mocking chuckles had faded. Conversations dipped when she passed. A few younger pilots avoided her eyes altogether. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was unease. The kind born when people realize the labels they've been using no longer fit. She didn't bask in it. She didn't seek it. She just carried her tray to the corner, ate in silence, and left. But the seed had been planted. She wasn't ordinary. Not by a long shot, and for the first time, the others began to sense it. What would you do if the person you dismissed as weakest suddenly showed strength you couldn't explain? Don't skip. The next section changes everything. The sun rose over Basra like a sheet of fire, painting the rooftops in red and gold. Dawn had arrived, and with it the terrorists' promise: executions would begin. The command tent was a storm of tension. Radios hissed with updates. Drones circled overhead, their feeds showing grainy shots of armed men pacing the gym's perimeter. The hostages huddled inside were just dark silhouettes against windows covered with makeshift barricades. The arguing had reached its peak when the heavy flap of the tent was pushed open. A tall figure stepped inside, dust clinging to his boots, body armor streaked with the marks of a long night's fight. He carried his helmet under his arm, his jaw set like granite. The room fell silent as he entered. The SEAL commander had arrived. He didn't waste words. He scanned the maps, the nervous officers, the restless air. His eyes were sharp, searching for something beyond the noise. Then he heard it, someone muttering at the edge of the group. "Cargo Queen thinks she can fly us in." The commander's gaze snapped toward the voice, then toward Emily. For the first time, he caught her call sign spoken aloud. "Raven." The single word hit the room like a thunderclap. His expression shifted instantly. It was as though a mask had fallen away, replaced by recognition that carried weight and memory. He stepped forward, boots grinding against the tent floor. "Did you just say Raven?" he asked, his voice cutting clean through the silence. Emily didn't answer. She stood still, helmet at her side, steady eyes locked on his. The commander stared hard at her face, the scar at her temple, the quiet steadiness in her posture. And then it clicked. The stories. The night missions. The legend whispered among operators who'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. "By God," he muttered, voice low, almost reverent. Then louder, to the entire tent. "By God, that's Captain Hayes. Stand down or stand with her." The tent froze. The colonel who had mocked her earlier went pale, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The young flight officers shifted uncomfortably, shame creeping into their faces. Even the SEALs, men hardened to never show surprise, straightened as though a weight had dropped onto their shoulders. Emily remained silent, but in her stillness was power. She didn't need to say a word. The recognition said everything. The commander turned slowly, letting his eyes sweep across the room. "Some of you don't know it because it's buried under classified reports, but I was there. Kandahar. Joint op, night run, under fire. They told us extraction was impossible. We'd written off 40 men. Then this woman, this pilot came out of the dark like a ghost and flew us home. If it wasn't for her, none of us would be standing here arguing today." Gasps rippled around the room. The colonel lowered his gaze. The young captains who had laughed now stared at their boots. The commander's voice hardened. "You think she ferries crates? She's flown missions you'll never hear about, under fire that would freeze most of you in place. If she says she can fly those hostages out, then you damn well clear the skies for her." Silence. Not the mocking silence from earlier, but the kind that follows when truth leaves no space for argument. Emily's eyes flicked down, then back up. Calm, controlled. She didn't bask in the revelation. She didn't smirk at the men who had mocked her. She simply stood there, the quiet pilot who carried scars and secrets, finally seen for who she really was. What would you have done in that room? Mock her again, or follow her lead? Engines screamed to life as dawn bled into the city. The plan was no longer theory, it was happening. Emily stood at the head of the pilots, helmet clipped, gloves pulled tight. Her voice carried over the roar of turbines, calm and measured, assigning call signs, confirming routes. The SEAL commander gave one sharp nod. No more questions. No more arguments. It was her show now. The Blackhawks lifted in unison, rotors shredding the smoky air. Dust swirled up from the compound, coating faces and goggles as the formation clawed skyward. Emily's bird took point, sliding low across rooftops, weaving between buildings so tight the wingtips seemed to scrape brick. Her voice came across the comm steady as stone. "Raven to all, hold formation, altitude 40 feet, follow my line." Gunfire cracked as they crossed the river. Muzzles flashed from rooftops. Bullets pinged harmlessly against reinforced plating, sparks flying, but the pilots held tight behind Emily's lead. She guided them through like she had drawn the map herself, because in her head she had. They came on the school like thunder. The building was ringed with armed men, barricades stacked high, but they had no time to react before ropes dropped and SEALs slid fast to the roof. Gunfire erupted instantly, muffled booms echoing inside as breachers forced their way through upper floors. "Raven, extraction zone clear in 2, came the call. Emily banked hard, dropping into the courtyard. Rotor wash blasted debris across the ground. Her voice was calm on the comms. "Bird 2, land rear. Bird 3, hold overhead. Keep your eyes on the windows." Then the RPGs came. A smoke trail arced from the gym window, hissing straight for the second helicopter. Emily saw it a split second before impact. "Brake right, Bird 2, she snapped. The pilot yanked hard, but the blast still clipped the tail, shoving the helicopter into a violent spin. Soldiers screamed over comms. Emily didn't think. She dropped her own hawk underneath, steadying the crippled bird's descent with the rotor wash of her own. Metal shrieked as rounds peppered her armor. Warning lights flashed red across her dash, but her voice stayed level. "I've got you. Correct your yaw now." Somehow, impossibly, the wounded helicopter steadied, climbing back into formation. Emily's own fuselage smoked, holes punched through panels, but she held firm. Inside the gym, doors finally burst open. The first hostages stumbled out, hands bound, eyes wide. SEALs herded them fast, shouting over the chaos. Dozens, then hundreds, pouring into the courtyard under the cover of spinning rotors. Emily's voice cut through it all. "Load fast. We are wheels up in 90 seconds. 90. Her crew chief yelled confirmation as civilians packed into the belly of the Hawk. Another bird touched down, doors sliding wide, children crying as they were hauled aboard. Gunfire still raked the air, RPG trails still slicing toward them. One slammed into a wall close enough to spray stone across Emily's windshield. She squinted, unfazed, hands locked steady on the controls. "Raven, we're full. Copy. Wheels up." One by one, helicopters heaved skyward, laden with civilians, tilting hard into escape routes Emily had mapped in silence while everyone else mocked her. Minutes stretched into eternity, but finally the last group clambered aboard. 200 lives, all of them. Not one left behind. The formation roared back across the river, battered but alive. When the wheels kissed down inside the embassy compound, silence fell. It wasn't the silence of dismissal now. It was the silence of awe. The hostages were helped out, stumbling, some weeping, some collapsing in relief. Soldiers stood frozen, watching Emily climb from her cockpit, helmet tucked under her arm. Her flight suit was streaked with smoke and sweat, her face calm as if she'd just landed a routine supply run. The SEAL commander stepped forward. He halted a few feet from her, squared his shoulders, and raised his hand in a sharp salute. Every soldier around him followed, a wave of respect crashing all at once. Emily returned the salute slowly, eyes steady, no words. She didn't need them. If this gave you goosebumps, wait for the moral in the next part. It changes how you'll see her forever. The compound buzzed with chaos after the last helicopter landed, but Emily stood at its center with the same quiet steadiness she had carried since the beginning. Troops swarmed the rescued hostages, medics hustled stretchers toward the wounded, radios barked with updates confirming every life had been accounted for. 200 souls delivered from the brink. Men clapped each other on the shoulders, voices broke with relief, and yet when they looked toward her, the one who had led the flight through fire, she did nothing to draw their attention. She didn't raise her voice or claim credit. When asked how the impossible had been pulled off, she spoke 3 words that summed her nature better than any medal could. It was teamwork. She credited the SEALs for their courage, the gunners for their steady hands, the crew chiefs for dragging civilians into the cabins. She pointed to every role but her own. Not once did she mention the moment she shielded another helicopter or the fact that she had threaded every pilot through the teeth of enemy fire without a single casualty. Later, in the quiet that followed, she sat on an empty ammo crate at the edge of the compound, away from the floodlights. Her gloves were off, her helmet resting beside her. She rubbed her thumb across the tattoo on her wrist, the faded wings and anchor. The ink was worn, but the meaning was not. It was for Jordan, her friend who had never made it back from Kandahar, the man who had once told her, "If no one else steps up, you do." She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering his laugh, the way he used to tap her shoulder before every mission. She whispered something only she could hear, a promise kept. A debt finally paid. The lesson in that night was not carved in the noise of engines or the shock of explosions. It wasn't in the salute that rippled across the compound, though that mattered. The real lesson lived in the space between, the quiet conviction of one person who refused to stay silent when everyone else turned away. True courage isn't loud. It doesn't demand to be noticed. It waits in the corner, underestimated, until the moment comes when lives hang in the balance, and then it steps forward without hesitation. We walk among people every day who carry scars we cannot see, patches tucked in lockers, languages spoken in whispers, tattoos faded beneath gloves. Their stories are not always told, but their strength is there, waiting. Sometimes, the hero isn't the one with the loudest voice. Sometimes, it's the one who speaks only when it matters most. Would you have had the courage to speak up like Emily Hayes, or would you have stayed silent? 200 lives were saved because one pilot refused to stay silent. Captain Emily Raven. Hayes didn't shout for attention, didn't beg to be believed. She simply acted when no one else would. Next time you hear someone mocked, overlooked, or dismissed, remember her. Quiet strength can change the course of history. If this story moved you, salute in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Your words keep these stories alive and honor those who lived them. And wait until you hear the next story, where a humble mechanic's secret past left an entire brigade frozen in silence. Don't miss it.